Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Champions Podcast with myself, Heather McCoy, and
Camp Squires.
today we have a special guest with us, Chris, that Champ actually knows him really well. I know him, but not as well as Champ does, and we are so excited to have him today to get to share some of his story, and we hope it inspires you. So we're going to get started, and we welcome you, Chris, to the Champions Podcast, and we're glad you can be here with us today.
Yeah, well, thank y'all so much for
And
having me. It is an honor to be here. Thank y'all so much.
so, Chris, why don't you jump in with whatever you feel comfortable with in regards to your story, what you're doing, what
Yeah,
you've been up to, that kind of thing.
yeah. So I didn't really grow up in church. I kind of went to church on and off. Um, but my dad's military, and when we moved to South Carolina, obviously we're in the Bible Belt, and people go to church down here. But I got put at a private Christian school, and that's really the first place that I was really exposed to God and hearing about him and things like that. And so that kind of, that was the seed that was planted. But I had really great friends in high school that just encouraged me to come to church, to be a part of it. And so that went on for probably a year or so before I got in a really bad car accident with some friends, that all of us came out unharmed. We had a couple scratches and bruises, but for the most part, we were 100% fine, and we should not have been. And that was kind of my first, like, okay, maybe, maybe there is a God, maybe there's something for me. And so I started going to church, and started with youth group, started going to church, and just kind of jumped in full force to see what it was about, and ended up getting saved about 4 months later. Um, and ever since then, it's normal hills and valleys you go through. Um, Finished high school, went to college, and graduated college. I moved back to Sumter, and it was kind of funny. Me and my wife had talked about taking over the youth group when we finished school, and coming back here, because the church that she grew up in and ultimately I ended up joining, there was only three of us in youth when we were high school age, and so we ended up going to a different youth group just because there wasn't a lot of people here to do it with. And so when we came back, we talked about wanting to volunteer in that space and kind of see what would happen. Um, it was really funny because we kind of mentioned it to the preacher, like, hey, I think this is something we might want to do, and she was like, okay, great. Well, the next Sunday in church, the preacher gets up and announces that me, Shelby, who's my wife, and then two other couples in the church were all taking over the youth group. We had no other conversations except, hey, we think we may want to do this thing. And the next Sunday it was, hey, you guys are now in charge of this. Take it and run with it. And that was 7 years ago. I've been doing youth ministry ever since. Um, and, I love it. So,
Heather, I'm gonna let you start with the first question because I feel like you're chomping at the bit over here.
Yeah, so since you kind of had that awakening moment of Jesus being there, do you feel like now that you've been in the youth ministry for so many years that maybe that was just a calling you never recognized that could kind of give you that fulfillment?
yeah, 100%. I think there was a reason I wasn't saved and really in church until I was 14 or 15 years old, because I'm able to connect with those kids that are coming in that maybe they haven't been to church, a lot of their life, or they're not super into church, because I was that kid, and I think that gives me a different perspective than people who grow up in church and that's all they know.
Yeah, and it's very relatable because, it's one thing for somebody that's grown up in church to relate to somebody else who's grown up in church, but for you to be able to relate to those kids that maybe didn't, but are trying to find their way, probably does give you a different perspective and a way to relate to them that they can say, okay, he understands me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
Um,
we all
Chris,
have, we all have different testimonies, and there's strengths and weaknesses everyone has that you're able to relate and connect to, and that's just something for me that I can relate to those kids that didn't grow up in it. So sorry for cutting you off, champ.
no, you're good. So I was gonna take a little bit of your thunder and share a little piece of the story about you and the t-shirt and the shorts and the Crocs. Heather was talking about the
Yeah, go
relatability.
for it.
So Chris doesn't wear, like, when he goes to church, he's always either in a sock t-shirt that you see there, or just a t-shirt, or a pair of shorts and Crocs. There you go.
Yep, my
And
Crocs.
he tells folks all the time, this is part of his story that I really admire and appreciate, that he wants not only for the kids to be able to relate, but also for it to feel like a safe space. I know we talk about in ministry, as a pastor, you want to bring your best to the Lord. And I get that. I do. But I think it's so tangible for these kids to be able to say, I'm here. And God's already here. He was already calling me here. But he wants me just as I am. And so that's a part of his story that I've always found just relatable and connectable with this generation of students.
Yeah, Jesus says, "Come as you are," and if the youth pastor is dressed in t-shirts and shorts and Crocs, like I'm always going to be the least stressed person in the room, and so anyone that comes through those doors, they're not going to feel out of place. I hope they don't. That's the goal. Is okay. This isn't. We don't have to get all dressed up, super nice and fancy. Just a normal person off the street can come in and worship and learn about God. So
And that's so
Yeah.
such a great mentality to have because, and I have that same mentality of course, it's nice to dress, but being able to get people in the church door and to learn about God and have a relationship with Him is not about what you're wearing. It should be about relating, especially to the younger generation of we don't care what you wear, whether it's t-shirt and jeans or whether you're in a suit and tie and a dress, but just come, just come. And so that's a great.
exactly.
No, let me be clear, because I have a struggle with this, but I also can connect with Chris so well from that perspective. I'm not saying, like, don't come in your bedroom shoes and your Walmart attire, but just be aware of where you are, and that God does the shifting and the changing
That's right.
and the heart posture. So yeah,
Exactly. We can worry about splitting hairs and what you need to wear when you're at church and things later. Like, let's get you in the door and let you hear the word, and you know
Now I know that
yep, yep.
mother now and you have two. How has it been for you raising your children, especially since you didn't grow up in knowing about the Lord until you were a teenager? How has that been for you to raise your kids knowing them at, infancy?
yeah, something that I love to tell people is I hope my kids have a boring testimony. Like, I hope my kid grows up in church and meets the Lord in church, and that's that. I think that's a goal as any for any parent. um but like, so we had VBS a couple weeks ago, and my oldest Ren, who's almost 4, is like front and center, dancing, praising God, worshiping God. And like even now, a couple weeks later, like we have the CD for VBS. I can see him like in the car, like he'll like raise his hands or he'll hold them open, and like it's just a bittersweet feeling that he's obviously feeling it even at such a young age. They call him Pastor Wren at daycare because randomly he'll break out into a worship song, or when they sit down to lunch, he makes sure everyone says their blessing before they start eating their lunch. And like, I love seeing that innocent faith.
That's all.
Um,
I've actually seen some of the
yeah.
Facebook of like him singing and stuff, and I just think it's so awesome.
So, one of the other things that I want to on is Sakahachi. That's actually how he and I met back in 2013. Yeah, I think. Am I right?
Yeah.
And he has been heavily involved with that ever since. And I think it's just interesting to hear. He said we were there last week together, and he said that he gets choked up talking about his kids, and I'm about to cry listening to him talk about his kids and just raising the boys, wanting them to have that boring testimony, but yet, even though it's boring, it's still powerful. And so I just like I don't know, watching somebody that you witnessed God do the changing of and to is unreal. So
So how has salt been for you, Chris? Like, what would you say your experience has been from when you first started to now? Because I know Champ has obviously kind of changed roles from when he first started to now being more like a leader. How has that been for you?
Yeah, and so I'm kind of in the same spot. So I started going in 2013, and it's Salkehatchie for me is always the week before my birthday. So it was right before my 16th birthday. And even before I was a Christian, even before I was in church, like serving is something that I've always enjoyed. So like even like in middle school, one of the like after school groups was I can't even remember what it was called, but we did community service projects and things like that, and it wasn't necessarily faith related, but you were still on the ground serving other people and things like that. That has always just been something that you know is on my heart, and when I became a Christian, like it made so much more sense to me. um First Peter 4:10 says something along the lines of each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others and to be a good steward of God's grace. And that's just something that I try and live by, being the hands of feet in Jesus. And it's not necessarily mission projects or construction ministry. Like that just happens to be where I serve. But the nursery during church, or the little kids programs, or there are so many ways to serve God and to serve others without having to go off. Salkehatchie just happens to be one that I fell in love with immediately. um, I mean, I got there that first year, and it's just a place where you're loved. You don't have to, especially for these high school kids, you don't have to be the cool popular guy, or the emo girl that sits in the corner and doesn't talk to anybody. Like there, you're just a child of God. It doesn't matter what kind of social status you come from. It doesn't matter where you're from, who you're normally around. Like everyone there is there to serve Jesus. And once we joke about it. The first couple of days of camp is always getting the 14 and 15-year olds who think they have to be cool and can't be like genuine and authentic there. You just gotta thump them in the back of the head a couple of times and be like, like look what's in front of you. um we're when we're there, we're working on homes, but we're working on hearts. We are there to.
that'll bring
Yeah, amen. I mean, we're there to work on people's houses, but we're there to work on hearts. So yeah, I started as a regular camper like anyone does. And the way it works at Salkehatchie is basically from 14 to 22, you're a regular camper. Um, there's not really anywhere else you can serve. Um, and at 23, you're allowed to be what we call a supervisory adult, where you're able to lead your own site and lead your own house. Um, and so the year I turned 23 was actually a year of COVID. And so I missed out on 2 years of being able to lead sites. But when we started back up, um, I got to lead a site. And that first year I led a site was probably my hardest year at camp. Um, we were just doing stuff that I had never done before. And I was having trouble picking up the concept. I've always done roofs when I was a camper. Um, I think there was 1 or 2 years I did windows or something else, but for the most part, like I've always roofed. And then this year was just something I'd never done before. So trying to lead a site of people was something I had never done, but it was the blind leading the blind. Um, on top of that, it was a small site for, I mean, there was 8 of us total, but by Wednesday we had dropped down to 5 because 3 people ended up having to leave or something came up or something like that. But that to me was really just one of those. It was just one of those God moments. Like, hey, here's one of your hills. It took you a while to climb up, and but you're at the top now. Um, so in 2023, I got to lead another site, but I was also the assistant camp director. So there's a lot of admin stuff and just stuff going into planning camp and doing camp while we're there. I did that for 2023 and 2024. So 2 years was kind of 1 foot in and 1 foot out of both being on site and leading a site and trying to lead camp and do camp. And we kind of figured out last year, like I can be okay at both, but I can't be good at both. I kind of had to pick, like, do I want to keep leading sites or do I want to help lead camp? Do I want to be part of the leadership team and help mold what we're doing at camp and make sure camp is still going on in 10, 20 years, Um, and so I sat and I prayed, and it ultimately came out that I wanted to be leading camp. I wanted to make sure in 10, 20 years that my kids and all the rest of the kids that come through my youth group and things like that are able to experience what I experienced as a teenager. So this was my first year 100% off site. I was just an assistant camp director. And I really thought I was going to miss being on site and working with the kids. But what I found fairly quickly was that because I wasn't on a site just with my group of 10 or 11 people, that I really got to build relationships and talk to everybody at camp. I said in kind of one of my, we did kind of like a round table at the end of the week to anyone could kind of get up and say what they wanted to say. And one of the things I said was like, normally at the end of the week when I leave, like I'm proud of 12 people. I'm proud of my site and the work we did. And like this year I got to be proud of 80 people because I got to go to all of the sites and see all of the kids and the adults working in all of the houses from start to finish. And so it was a wonderful week. And like I said at the beginning, if construction ministry is not something you can do, find somewhere to serve. Just find somewhere to put others before yourself and kind of dive into that, to be the hands and feet of Jesus and see how you feel when you're doing it.
That's so awesome. And you talk about relationships, and I can imagine that, not to say you had, bad people in your life before you became a Christian, but I'm sure you can kind of see a difference, a shift in your relationships from before you were a believer to now. And just, I'm sure you have like flourishing relationships around you that, lift you up and people that pray with you. And it's probably just such a impactful feeling.
Yeah, we talk about it all the time that I mean, there are so many leaders at camp and outside of camp that I know that I can call on at any point to say like, hey, I really need prayer in this, or I just need someone to listen to me while I talk this out loud. And being able to have that community of people like that is I think that's what makes Christianity so great, is that you don't have to carry your burdens alone. You don't have to do life alone. Like, you have people that are in your corner that are going to encourage you every step of the way, and just continue reminding you like, hey, look up, look to God, and look forward. So
And I've enjoyed this one because if you noticed, I've kind of stayed quiet. Shocker, surprise, surprise. And I can, and it's so good because growing up in the environment that I did, I always thought that I had to like press my people on, like, constantly press them on as far as encouraging and telling everybody in the brother who was so and so and what they did and who they were and who God was making them to be. But I can just sit here and listen to Chris's story and know that what the Lord has done in him and what he is doing. And I don't need to like add or take away from it. It is what it is. And it's good to be able to sit back and say, how can I push you forward? So, anything else, Chris, that you want to share? What did it, I tell you what did it mean for you to be a champion for Christ? If I asked you, what does that look like to you? What does that mean to you? What would you say?
I think you just need to tell people. I mean, you know, it doesn't have to be you sharing your testimony or being able to write a sermon and share a message. It's just, I have a sticker on the back of my truck that says he is risen. So I know every car that I drive by sees something about Christ. Just when you go out to lunch and you sit and you pray before you eat your meal, like, people around you can see that. Actions speak louder than words too, but just telling people, it doesn't have to be some long message and things like that. It's getting them in the door, getting them thinking about it, getting them curious about it enough to where God starts working on their heart, you know, to say, hey, dig into that a little bit more. And so just being able to be that seed, that first plant.
And so many of
And
these,
dig in the-
great because especially if you're talking about non-believers or somebody that maybe is kind of testing the waters out about faith, you start throwing all these things to them and they get really overwhelmed. But if you
Mm-hmm.
simple things, it's kind of more receptive because they're like, okay, well, they're not trying to throw like 50 Bible verses at me and expect me to know what they are and believe them. But like you said, it's just getting people in the door and starting that conversation. And, even a sticker on a truck can start a conversation.
And
Yeah.
there was a phrase I heard one time in a seminar that said, um, "Preach a sermon when with your life when necessary. Use words." And so, like, that just, I think, hones into what Chris is talking about. It's not your words. It's not. People don't remember what you said. They remember how you made them feel. And Chris is just like, I could listen to him all day just to see, like, watching his passion. He didn't stop talking from the time he started this to the time about now, just about what the Lord has done and how he's changed his heart, and how he's striving to raise his kids is just that's life, and that's what Christ calls us to.
Yeah, I think a big misconception people get are like Christians are fun killers and they don't do anything except stuff at church and things like that. But like, we're all just normal people out here. We have our own. We all have our struggles, and you know, we all have our baggage in life. But like, we like to have fun.
Where'd you have
I
where'd you
do
have
a ton of
where'd
what
you have fun today, Chris? Where'd you have fun today?
I went to Sam's Club with four teenagers and my 4-year-old, which was a blast. They created a chain of carts. One of them was sitting on the end of one cart, pushing another cart, and on the end of that cart, the other one was sitting and pushing the other cart. And so I had essentially an 18-wheeler going through Sam's Club. We're getting ready for an event tomorrow. So,
And fun.
we have a blast. It we're normal people too. I'm not sitting in the sanctuary listening to messages 24/7. Like we all have normal lives to live too. We choose to put God at the top and remember that in everything we do, we're doing it for the Lord, and it should be pleasing to Him. Um, and God has to turn your heart to that. It's not something that comes naturally. It's not something that you become a Christian and bam, you know, that's how you live your life. But that's what we all strive for.
Yes.
Um, so
Well, Heather, I'm going to let you close, but I just want to say, like, I have enjoyed this from this perspective. Again, sitting and listening to Chris just share from a fire hose, honestly, but from a fire hose that never runs dry. And that's not me saying that he doesn't have those moments where it feels dry, but it's just he knows where his water supply comes from, his grace supply. And when you get to watch the people that you do life with, because he and I do life with each other on a daily, but when you get to watch people do that and live it, it's incredible. So thank you for it.
well, I thank y'all for letting me come on here and share. And yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be able to sit here and share and talk like I do without Jesus, and that's ultimately the important thing. So thank y'all for giving me the platform to be able to do that for a little bit.
Yeah,
Well, I love it.
I think it's awesome and so inspiring. I know that you may not feel like you're really inspiring people, but I'm sure whether it's a teenager or even an adult that they're looking at your story and saying, I can do that too. And so that's really impactful. And we've really enjoyed having you on today. And you're welcome back anytime to share anything. But we thank you for just sharing a piece of your heart and your story. And we know that people that listen to this will also enjoy it.
So there's a champion for Christ, and I hope that those around that listen to this next week will find that space and that spark to have that same sort of attitude, or at least strive towards that. So we hope that you've enjoyed it. Join us next week for the Champions Podcast. Take care.